Thanks for tuning in to the Empire Boxing Podcast. A huge thank you to our partners at Sting Boxing. It doesn't matter if you're into boxing for fitness, as an amateur, or as a pro, Sting has something for you. Head to their website, stingsports.ca, and use the code EMPIRE10 at the checkout to receive 10% off.
An Empire Boxing and Unlearning Network production.
Welcome back to the Empire Boxing Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Jay, and we are in the studio with two very special guests today. We have Harry Davis, is a CSCS Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist, a BJJ Purple Belt under Ben Dyson from the Roy Dean lineage. And Harry's been involved in martial arts since the age of 12 years old, I believe, and got your start in Wing Chun. Yes?
This is correct.
Yes. He cut his teeth in the gym as a teenager and has traveled all over the world absorbing knowledge and honing his craft. And I will say craft plural, many crafts. You have many crafts, very good at many things. And Harry is now setting most of his focus on helping grapplers get stronger for competitive grapplers and hobbyists as well as regular strength and conditioning clients. And then we have Geoff Chiu, who I've never met you in person, but when you came through the door, I was like, I know you,
we all know each other.
I know, Instagram is a funny place. Geoff's got a bachelor in kinesiology and is also a certified strength and conditioning specialist. And Geoff has played a pivotal role in helping athletes, both on a provincial, national, and international level. And currently, how we're all connected is you are the head strength and performance coach for Quinnet Boxing Club, which is sort of our premier boxing club where the professionals are being kind of farmed out of Vancouver, which is a huge pride point for us. So welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And then Geoff, you're also involved in Muay Thai as well as an athlete, as a hobbyist?
Hobbyist for now.
For now.
Maybe I'll fight at the
cliffhanger of the century. Yeah?
Yeah, maybe.
What about
Geoff?
Yeah, right?
Yeah, I've competed in like Kyokushin karate as a kid, and
Yeah.
I've done powerlifting, but not like a professional fight. So
Right.
maybe that's a challenge I'll take.
Geoff, there's still
later in the
time.
year.
There's still time. How old are you?
29.
Get on it, son.
Plenty of time.
Plenty, yeah.
But I'm also like, get on it, because
Go.
you're gonna have your pro debut against like a 20-year-old or something. It's
Maybe
how it
like a
works.
40-year-old taxi driver. In
Yo,
Bangkok.
yeah. You know what? Honestly, wait it out till you get to the Masters division. And
No,
then
there's no master divisions
no
out there. You
Masters
just fight
division?
whoever, especially in Thailand.
Oh my god.
If
Wow.
the price is right.
Yeah,
If
if
the price is right for like $20.
I will. Yeah, bet my chickens on you. Okay, cool. I'm going to start with you, Harry. Give us a little origin story. I kind of gave you a little bit of an intro, but give us the details of how you first discovered martial arts.
So I guess the biggest one for me was when our friend Bruce Lee got on my screen. And
Yes.
I think someone lent me a VHS tape or a CD-ROM. It was probably a burnt
ROM.
CD-ROM copy.
Don't date
of
yourself
Enter the
too bad
Dragon.
there.
Yeah. That's how old I am. And I saw Bruce. And as soon as I saw Bruce, I lost the plot, basically. I was just like, who is this guy? How do I become like him? What's the deal? And I got my copy of The Art of Expressing the Human Body by John Little. And that was my Bible. I studied that thing and just for a couple of years, actually, before I could even get to a martial arts class. Went to a Japanese jiu-jitsu class / judo. After 2 weeks, entered a judo comp. I thought, this is pretty cool. And then out of that, realized the teacher wasn't too good. It was just like a community center kind of like kids club. I wanted a bit more. And a friend of mine was teaching Wing Chun. And he said, come down to the club. I think you might enjoy it. And I was 14 at the time. I had a little part-time job so I could pay for my classes.
Doing what?
I was washing up dishes and pouring beers in a Chinese Malaysian restaurant.
In the UK.
In the UK.
So it is legal for a 14-year-old.
Highly illegal to pour beers.
We
in
won't
Tell the Chinese
out
do it.
anyone
but
that
I was wearing a waistcoat, so who knew?
Right.
And yeah, so that was my intro to Wing Chun, and that was it. That started the path down martial arts. I realized it was what I wanted to do in some aspect of my life. And yeah, I was coaching classes by age 17, and that was the transition then into jiu-jitsu and all the rest of it.
And you've also had a few cage fights under your belt and kind of dipped into the
amateur
MMA
level,
world.
yeah, the amateur level in the UK, realized pretty quickly it's not how I wanted to make my living. And that's even more respect for the people that do earn their bread that way.
Absolutely.
It's brutal. So I realized I could probably help more people than I could knock people out, and took a kind of career turn. I'm glad I tried it and glad I got in there and got amongst it. But yeah, not for me as a job per se, but lifelong fan.
Yeah. And then Geoff, same question to you. How did you cut your teeth in and get into what you're doing now and your proximity to combat sport?
Well, like any other small Asian kid, my parents put me into karate as like a 5-year-old.
Is that like it's like piano and karate?
It's,
Is that
it's
the right
piano and some sort of
passage?
martial arts. I'm so glad I didn't get put into taekwondo though. I would have been so
I feel like
angry.
piano is like the ultimate like equalizer of children, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like for white kids, it's soccer and piano.
Right.
That's what you do. So you were piano
yeah.
and karate wicked.
So I was put into karate class at the age of 5 just for self-defense. And I kind of share the same sentiment as Harry. Like Bruce Lee was everything to me. He's from Hong Kong. My parents are from Hong Kong.
Wicked.
All the movies were awesome. Like I knew it was kind of choreographed, but at the same time, he was still like a hero to me. And not only is he a martial artist, he's like a philosopher. He was really big into fitness. I remember seeing like his fitness routines, and I would try to copy those as a kid, like push-ups, sit-ups
Yes.
at night before bed.
Yes.
I did karate, Kyokushin karate for several years. I stopped around my teens because I realized like, hey, why are we not punching each other in the face? This is kind of dumb for a striking art.
Yeah.
So I got into boxing and Muay Thai just at like the local level, but never really trained it seriously. And for some reason, I decided to get into kinesiology. So being at UBC, I was probably one of the small handful of students that wanted to get into high performance S&C.
Right.
Everyone wanted to get into physio. So
That's interesting. I always
Yeah.
figured people kind of go into those programs with like, oh, I want to work with athletes at a high level. And then they eventually realize that it's actually really difficult to do that. And it weeds a lot of people down to physio, but you thought the
I
opposite.
didn't have like an end goal in mind
Right.
when I first joined the university. Like I almost wanted to get into engineering or music, but I just kind of stumbled upon that. And then I started working as a personal trainer, working with kids, like soccer moms, like parents, and
Gen
then
pop kinda,
Gen pop,
yeah.
yeah. And then I slowly got into powerlifting and weightlifting, knowing that I always wanted to make the full circle back to combat sports, which is what I've been focusing on since 2018 or so.
Right. And how did you
2017.
know that?
How
That
did I
you
know?
wanted to end up in combat sports?
Because I always liked it as a kid growing up. I always watched the UFC. I was probably one of the first people I knew that watched MMA in high school. So
Yeah.
I always loved it. I love the culture. I love watching it. I love training. So
Yeah. Amazing. And so I wanted to, because you both have traveled quite a bit, quite extensively, for both like, pleasure levels. And then also I think, it's kind of lent itself well to research and development, et cetera. I wanted to get both of your perspectives on like the differences mainly between Canada, S&C, and other parts of the world. So H, why don't we start with you? What have you noticed kind of working both in the UK, possibly like, I guess, New Zealand, Australia, your experiences there? How is Canada different in how they understand what S&C is and how it's applied?
Well, Geoff can probably attest to this for his time spent in the UK as well. Some of the main differences I've noticed with West Coast Canada, because I can only talk for West Coast Canada, is that S&C seems to be more locked into the main national sports. Canadian football, ice hockey, a little bit with soccer, a little bit with rugby. That seems to be about it. And I'm talking from the perspective of S&C being more of a household name, i.e. if you grow up in an ice hockey program in the west of Canada, you probably will be exposed to strength and conditioning of some sort along your way, or some sort of athletic trainer of sorts. In my experience in the UK, there's a broader range of pro sport available at a high level. So rugby, premiership soccer, S&C is part and parcel of those industries. Less so though, interestingly, in the UK in high school realm. So in the UK, we don't really have strength and conditioning coaches, or at least when I was growing up, you didn't have S&C coaches in the high school programs. Whereas I feel like actually there might be more of a chance in the west coast of the Americas and Canadas to be exposed to S&C in the high school program. Right. So although we don't have that in the UK in the high school setting, we do in the pro sport setting.
Right.
And there's a load more sports to choose from. University upwards, strength and conditioning is pretty prevalent amongst the competitive teams, the first teams, as it were. And they tend to be a funnel and a gateway into the premierships and,
right.
the big leagues. So yeah, I would say the UK is probably a little bit further ahead in terms of strength and conditioning for sports, just because there's more sports and more people.
Right.
However, that's not to say that stuff like ice hockey and and the field footballs over here aren't impressive either. They truly are, but there's just fewer people, I think, on the west coast of Canada total. So as a result, there's just going to be less exposure to something niche like sports performance.
And Geoff, what do you think?
Yeah, as an S&C coach, there's definitely less avenues in Canada. There was no route for me heading out of university. It's either you work in, I think it's called CIS, Canadian Institute of Sport, working with volleyball players, hockey players. But as someone who's never been involved seriously in team sports, like that wasn't a route that I saw myself going down. So not having an established route for, I would say, how would you say that, like private sports, like professional sports, like combat sports, it was a bit tougher to navigate through the industry.
Right. Yeah, I bet.
I think there's also a misconception just around, like, I think like if you sampled most people, I think personal trainer and strength and conditioning coach get kind of blended, and that title gets thrown around a lot. So for people that are maybe listening to this and maybe don't really understand the differences, do you want to kind of unpack that a little bit and tell us, like, what are the main differences between a personal trainer and an S&C coach, and why personal trainers shouldn't use that title if they are not CSCS certified?
I think both coach to a certain degree. Personal trainers, the main difference is the population that you're working with. Personal trainers work with more gem pop. They want to work with primarily with people who want to lose weight, gain muscle hypertrophy. I would say S&C coaches work with athletes who have an end goal in mind, like a competition goal, a competitive goal.
Mm-hmm. And that's probably just more the depth of the education involved on the CSCS side that can kind of take someone from, because ultimately you guys are working with athletes that are, you know, quite proficient already in their sport, quite fit in their sport, conditioned for their sport. So you're taking someone from good and making them great, which is way harder than taking someone from, I've never squatted before and I want to lose 10 pounds, right? So, you know, maybe that's kind of like where that misunderstanding gets thrown around a lot. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating topic of conversation and something that I've wrestled with through my own career, trying to gain recognition in both fields. I think the big ones that stand out for me is the lack of quality control in personal training. Now, that's not to say there isn't a lack of quality control in strength and conditioning, but in general, it's assumed that if you're in the S&C world, you have some sort of education behind you, whether that's a certification, an accreditation with an organization, a degree, in the trenches experience, internships, etc. Personal training, there's no real legal prerequisite to call yourself that. You can do a certificate in 12 weeks, in 12 hours, online, make one up, Photoshop it, whatever. It doesn't really matter. And
you get a huge spectrum too, right? There's people who have been in kinesiology and decided to be personal trainers. And then you have people who are off of, you know, IT, made a career switch and because they enjoy doing bicep curls on the weekend.
Yeah. The laughing joke, I think, is that personal training pays the bills.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Well, and that's in sport too. You see that boxing clubs don't make their money on the pros; they make their money on their members. You know.
Yeah, it's where the biggest market is, and arguably the market for personal training is much greater. But I think the quality control is something that sets it apart. Ideally, strength and conditioning should be based on science and studies. Personal training has no kind of dependency on that. There's no command that personal training should be based on science. It can be based on whatever you want. Yeah. And really it's based on results, isn't it? If your client's happy or not. And even that is, how do you define results, right? Exactly.
It can be a sweaty t-shirt to some people.
You can move the goalposts a lot. Yeah. So I think S&C now, unfortunately, it's been used as a marketing term, like you said, for personal trainers to get more clout. And most S&C coaches won't admit that they have to do personal training to pay the bills, but that's just the lay of the land. Right. I think there's some key differences, but ultimately we're doing similar things, like Geoff said, where they're both coaching. Yeah. And you could argue that actually to be a good S&C coach, you should cut your teeth with personal training, with Gem Pop.
Oh, I think you can learn so much from the
Gem Pop. So one does feed into the other, I think.
That's where I think every S&C coach should start.
Interesting.
Because it's also a running joke that everyone that comes out of university wants to train professional athletes, and they realize that they're going to be training Gen Pop for the first few years.
Yeah, Sally had a hip replacement.
Yeah,
it needs to
and that's almost just as difficult as training professional athletes. Yeah, in a sense, it's just the fact that we work in sport, so there are consequences to our coaching. It's like there are wins, there are losses. It's not like, oh, we lost 10 pounds versus 11 pounds. It's, hey, we lost a championship, or your fighters are on a losing streak. So there are consequences to
100%.
competition.
Yeah,
Right.
100%.
I think that's the biggest difference. We're working towards a competition which has consequences.
Yeah, and if you work for an organization or a sports team or a professional athlete and they're on a losing streak, you will be held accountable for
Your
that.
name is
you
now-
will be brought into
yeah.
question of what you're doing, what your practice is, explain yourself. Whereas in personal training, the client might just leave. Right. That's the only real consequence is you might lose a client. And even then you might not lose a client. You might just do a crap job for your entire career, which you see with some personal trainers. You see that. So the consequence is big. And you'd hope then, because of that consequence, there's a higher quality control and a standard for S&C.
Yeah.
Again, that's not true, but you would hope so. You would hope.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think in the personal training world, there's an element of the personality that can kind of like shift off for the quality or maybe the education or maybe the practice, right? Whereas an S&C is like, okay, cool if you have this like star-studded personality and you make your way onto UFC embedded, but if you're not doing a good job, it's pretty fucking obvious, right? And so on that topic, like we're seeing that come into mainstream media around sport a lot more. Is we're not just seeing the Eddie Reynosos and the guys holding pads and stuff. Shout out to all the old boys just still taking kicks, right? We're also seeing their S&C coaches, and we're looking into the camps a little bit. And how important do you guys think that is for what you do when you see that shown on UFC embedded and shows like that?
Super important. It shows that we can actually make money and be kind of noticed. Same with sports nutritionists. I think it's great that these UFC embedded show like the whole interdisciplinary team, right?
Yeah.
From the psychologist to the sports nutritionist to the S&C coach. I think those are all professionals that build the athlete together, not just the head coach or the pad holder.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a nice change in the last 5 to 10 years is now it's not so much about last man standing. I've got one coach, like the Rocky style and, I've raised him since he was a youngster. It's now there's a whole team, like Geoff says, behind them. And these are all studied fields, right? Sports nutrition, sports psychology, S&C, they are based on studies and science is backing them. So they're respected fields, like the data's there now to push forward and create champions. And I think it's great as well to see the exposure that there is a team behind an individual.
Right.
And that the old gladiatorial model is perhaps a little obsolete and we can actually use science now to unleash potential in people to become champions rather than whittle away the competition till there's one person standing, which was very much the UFC Ken Shamrock days of the late 90s. If you looked at their training camps, it was very much just like, who's left after 7 hours of fighting? Okay, you're eligible to go.
Let's bring that back. No time limit around
all the all the physiotherapists and chiropractors are like, do it.
Make us rich.
But like also I think that having the exposure and the lights on sort of the other elements of the camp apart from like the striking professionals or whatever, I think do you also think it's contributing to improving the quality of who people are sourcing out for their strength and conditioning? Like, I think some of the first videos that came out where you'd see like, yeah, exactly like the strength, it's like, the med ball and the abs kind of thing. And they're like doing some ridiculous stuff that was been part of boxing since the dawn of time, like 1,000 push-ups after you've been striking or sparring for 90 minutes. So what do you think it's done to improve the quality of that in the public eye as well as in the professional eye?
That's a great question. I think a lot of it is still illusion. If you're looking at the media of social media, the Instagrams, the YouTubes, because when you look at an embedded episode, okay, I love UFC embeddeds. I don't know quite why, because it's just people eating and walking around.
The production level is so good though. And it draws you in from an emotional side. I'm a huge fan too.
People love vlogs, especially from professional fighters that they've been following.
Like the Gate
like
Cheese doing his own.
How many day in the life of
I've watched,
eating,
even from the days of UFC All Access, I used to watch that back in like the 2009s, 2008s. I used to love it. But I think with that, it doesn't tell the whole story. Okay, so very often you'll see the media in an embedded episode, let's take that as an example, showing some exercises for the peaking portion of a fighter's camp. But some people can think, wow, that's the whole camp. Right. That's all fighters do is, landmine punches. Yeah. Or whatever it is. So
coming back to that.
We will. We will.
I'm just going to throw an asterisk.
But I don't know if it's improved the quality of S&C or not, just having the exposure. I think if anything, it's raised the level of awareness that S&C is a thing, and that if you want to take fighting seriously, boxing, MMA, grappling, you should probably look at your S&C seriously if you want to be competitive with that. As for the quality, I'm not sure, because there's still a lot of people that are getting airtime that are just doing dog shit.
Right.
So,
and partly, do you think that's part like they're trying to pick their most flash movement for the sake of the episode? Because like honestly, if you did like neck isos, everyone's like during that section of the. But if you're doing some like med ball slam or some landmine punch or something, it looks more flash. Do you think there's an element of that to it?
That would depend on the direction of the media team, wouldn't it? If the director says I want something cool and kinetic, then the trainer will be like, okay, this isn't normally what we do.
I would bet on it,
but let's do some battle ropes and med ball slams because it looks cool on camera.
What does that do to Instagram?
Well, it drives the views.
Sure. But then you also have you have a whole population of people, again, to your point, that think this is what it's all about.
But that's the byproduct of exposure, isn't it?
Yeah.
If the exposure isn't accurate, well, that's just how it goes.
Fascinating, isn't it?
It's almost like, would we take exposure over quality? Would you rather people take you seriously because you say I'm an S&C coach, and that they still think all you do is, rope slams and sort of med balls, or,
one of our mutual coaching friends calls it performative exercises. Basically, exercises for the gram.
Yeah.
Right.
And that drives views.
Yeah.
That's just, you play into the algorithm. But I don't know if those kind of coaches last in the long term, because their results eventually speak for themselves.
Yeah, good point.
Quality will always withstand.
Yeah, should do. Like
Quality,
we said earlier,
consistency.
You're accountable for the outcome of the sport, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not directly, but you're part of the contribution for that. So your practice will be called into question eventually. I do think, coming back to the personal training versus S&C, that if you ride on personality as an S&C coach, you can get further than you can with riding on quality, because you can build rapport and the relationship will carry you further than perhaps your actual skill set will. I've seen that time and time again.
Not just in that industry. Either.
Yeah, well, arguably in everything, right? Like our friend Arnie says, everything is selling. It's if you can sell.
Wait, what was that?
If you can sell, then you can last,
Impressions, all podcasts.
Yeah. We've got some accents lined up for you later with Dead Man's Fingers Rum, our official sponsor. Okay, cool. Let's bring it back to it's great to have you guys both here, because you have a similar perspectives, similar education, but also kind of operate in different fields, but all under the umbrella of combat sports, which is why I think we can get a lot of really cool back and forth and some dialogue going on the topic, which I think a lot of our fans will think is really interesting because everyone's about it. So what I wanted to ask, and I'll leave this like you guys can kind of vibe on this a little bit, but what is the main difference between the S&C programming for a grappler or MMA, let's open that up as a third silo, and then boxing?
Debate time. No, I'm just kidding.
Debate time. Well, Geoff is at the forefront, really, of the semi-pro and pro boxing S&C in this corner of the world, right? With the guys you're working with. So maybe... Yeah,
we're kind of both in combat sports, but on different ends of the spectrum.
The ends of the
work
spectrum,
with a lot of grapplers. I work with primarily strikers.
Yeah.
So what are the main things that are consistent, I guess, and what are the main things that are different?
How I break it down to people is, in grappling, you move bodies. You have to lift them. You have to... move around them. Yep.
In
striking sports, you're primarily moving your own limbs. So the biggest difference is going to be strength differences.
And how does that impact your exercise selection for various, components of the camp? Yeah.
For strikers, you're lifting less absolute load. You're doing more high velocity exercises that translate to the sport, which is higher velocity than grappling. And in grappling, you would lift heavy weights, so you can get better at lifting heavy weights and heavier people.
And heavier people, being competent with your own body weight, but external to you in various forms, whether that's a human, a barbell, sandbag, doesn't matter. Are you competent with that? Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that's really interesting.
That's a very simplified
but
explanation.
Important simplification. It's first principles levels. That is the two differences of the sport.
That is the distinction.
You can't hold in boxing, right? So why practice holding?
Right.
It's like you want to practice, like Geoff says, high velocity, because that's where the damage comes behind the shots, and you're limited to just your hands for boxing.
And then you got sports like MMA and Muay Thai, where you have a grappling component to it, and then how that changes training is you're doing a bit of both, maybe 50-50. you're lifting heavy weights, but you're also moving your body quickly.
Yeah. And arguably MMA, because it's such a demanding skill set as an entirety, less is more in the strength side of things, or at least in the weight room, because there's so many skills to learn. Muay Thai, boxing, grappling, okay, it's more just that sport. But MMA, now you're into a whole lion's den of options.
Yeah,
so
that's always
actually,
blown my mind.
it doesn't need to be that crazy, I don't think, in the weight room, really. You need a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
So you would suggest keeping the strength training simple because the disciplines outside of that there's way more complexity there.
Yeah, arguably, I mean, Geoff can chime in on this as well, but for an MMA athlete, we really just need them to be able to train their skills enough to be competent and not fall apart in the process. The injury rate is so wild in combat sports anyway. Really, we're just trying to reduce that so that they can get in and fight. Now, obviously, you're still going to follow some principles throughout their camp and follow some kind of timeline and some structure there. We're not just doing one exercise in the weight room and calling it a day.
Right.
But it's the simplest, weirdly, in terms of content, I'd say, out of all the combat sports, because it's probably the most demanding and the most variable.
Yeah.
There's just so many variables with MMA.
Right.
I would say the programming is complex, but like load management, dealing with the injuries, that's very complex behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes.
Sorry, I meant to say programming is very simple, but the load management and the injury management, managing athletes' schedules, that's way more complex.
It's way more complex because of the variables. But if you looked at the actual program on paper, it wouldn't be too baffling.
Right.
But you need to have the brain from the S&C coach's perspective behind the scenes. That's where the complexity comes in, because you've got to know how to simplify in such a way that it's still effective.
And that differentiates a beginner from an expert. I think beginner coaches will chase the complexity in MMA, whereas experts will simplify the program.
That's
and on
a nugget.
paper, it might not look like much, but you're doing a lot of things externally to make sure the program goes correctly, their scheduling is right, their fatigue management is on point.
Yeah, fatigue management's huge. It's huge. And yeah, you're right. The beginner's likely to fall into the trap. Well, it looks like the sport, so let's do it. And there's got 1,000 exercises a session or whatever it is.
Right.
More complex than it needs to be. But you need to have the experience as a coach to be able to whittle that away and just be left with what's actually going to work. And like Geoff says, the fatigue management across a camp, let's say, or across week to week is huge, because there's so many sessions that they've got to complete on skill sets. Really, we're one small cornerstone of the pyramid that leads up to competition. Right? There's a lot more going on, which, to be fair to Geoff, actually is one of the first coaches to really talk about bridging the gap between skills coaches and S&C, to communicate that. Because if you're left in the dark as an S&C coach trying to manage an MMA fighter's fatigue management, it's quite difficult. Whereas if you can communicate with the team, now you've got a chance to really work together and steer that towards a positive competition.
Right. That must pose quite a few challenges then when you're working like with a group of athletes or even an individual from a remote perspective versus actually being able to be face-to-face in session, watching their training, seeing the fatigue for yourself. How important is it to be able to have effective communication with your athletes?
Super important. I would be lying if I sat here and said like if I work with athletes remotely, I get to see all their training sessions, I get to talk to their coaches. That just doesn't happen. I work with what I can.
Right.
Sometimes I'm in touch with their coaches, sometimes I'm not, and I have to work around that. So just being flexible as an S&C coach and knowing where you can make a difference is really important.
Yeah, what's the key 20% that you're going to invest in that's going to make 80% of the gains come? And I think line of questioning is super important when you work on a remote basis as well for the coach's perspective. Like, you got to ask the right questions. And what's funny about fighters is there's a personality complex there very often with blokes and machoism is you don't want to ask them, could you have handled more? You know, that kind of, it's a loaded question for a fighter. They're like, well, yeah, of course I could.
Yeah, so you have to be really careful with the questions you ask.
Yeah, because they'll swing the response.
Like the fist on the chest.
Yeah.
Especially fighters, like they always want to do more.
For sure.
Always want to do more.
You got to reel them back.
Because it's a test of their toughness almost.
I honestly think that is a mentality that is a bit, well, it's widespread and it's also detrimental, even for Gen Pop. There's still a massive misconception around people that are, excited to train or have invested in their training where more is more. And there's like, I push myself to exhaustion every session, but they don't really understand why. and how it's important it is for an athlete to realize that that should not be the end game of the S&C component, at least of their camp. So it's really interesting to hear you guys kind of talk about this and kind of unpack this, because I don't think people really understand what goes into it.
Yeah, I think the grind is like romanticized through like movies like
Massively.
Rocky and stuff.
Rocky,
I think the
come
grind
on.
to me is staying disciplined from day to day and doing things that
Right.
you might not want to do from a recovery standpoint. Like,
It's way less sexy.
Yeah.
it's not sexy.
The reality is way less
Yeah.
sexy than the screen
Yeah.
depicts it to
Well, it's
be.
interesting. I won't name names, but I've chatted with
Drop the names after.
I've chatted with boxers that you
Yeah.
work with, like, and when they first started with you,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, how was it? And they were like, yeah, I don't know. It's like not that hard. And that's seen as a negative.
Give me the names.
yeah.
Give me
Right,
We'll
Evans.
up the RP in no time.
But how important is sort of that like 70%?
It's really tough for coaches to hold back because, like, let's say I work with an athlete for the first 1 to 2 weeks and they're, oh, it's not that hard. It's really hard to create buy-in that way. When the workouts aren't hard, they feel like they're not being challenged.
Yeah.
But I think long-term always, I assume that these athletes are going to be with me for months. So it doesn't really matter what we're doing now. It's what the end goal is going to be.
And how do you effectively communicate to an athlete that says to you, oh, it's, not that hard, that isn't mutually exclusive to they're not training in a correct way for the long-term results? How do you communicate that to someone?
Maybe small, like, weekly wins. Like, I'll say, like, hey, if you're training too hard, you're going to get too sore for boxing or for your skill sessions or for grappling. Kind of letting them know the consequences of training a bit too hard, maybe letting them feel that for a few sessions.
Right.
But
Yeah, I think also if you can communicate the concepts of like a periodized approach in real time, in layman's terms, to the fighters, you've got a better chance. So you can explain that we're achieving work here over time. So you might think the sessions are easy now, but we're just starting. We're on week 2 or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and we've got an 8-week camp or
Yeah.
a 16-week camp or whatever it is. So if you can articulate that, suspend your judgment for this point of time. We're actually dealing with blocks of time here. I think that can help as well. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, right, it's easy for now, but that's going to change. There's going to be periods where it's harder. There's going to be periods where it's easier. But just because it's easy right now, this week, this session, that's not the track record forever. Reeling in is a skill, but I'd often, I don't know about you, Jeff, but I'd often reel somebody in versus crack the whip to get them off the couch.
yeah, especially fighters.
Yeah, bleeding the stone is
Yeah.
not fun for any coach.
Especially fighters who have already bought into S&C. Like,
Right.
they're serious about their career. So they train hard. You don't have to crack the whip.
Right.
Yeah, it's almost like it's a given. They're going to turn up, they're going to work hard, whatever it is. It's just a matter of what you put in front of them and communicating the global level
Yeah.
of fatigue and managing that sensibly along the way.
Right.
And we work with humans at the end of the day, so they all operate differently. Some might respond well to articulating about periodization and all the science. Other people might just have to suffer the consequences once or twice, come into each session a bit too sore. They're
Right.
like, okay, I understand why we're doing the things we're doing.
Yeah, that's
in
it.
terms
That's
of RPE
interesting.
and load management.
Yeah, just make them feel it viscerally.
Right.
Yeah.
If they come in buried.
Not as a
it's like-
punishment, but kind of like,
no, as a
Yeah.
one end of the spectrum, right? You've given them the boundary of the far end. Oh, this is what overreaching feels like. Not fun, right? Like now you can't throw a punch because your delts are screaming.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
kind of thing. And like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a smart approach because that way they'll feel that for themselves. You don't
Yeah.
need to now articulate periodization to
Yeah.
them. You're just like, yeah, see, sore sucks. you know?
Yeah. Harry, why do you think that sort of the excitement about adding S&C as a component is kind of slower as in grapplers as a population than it is with boxers? I feel like boxers
you,
and MMA.
you think that's true?
I do. Well, and I could be wrong, and I can't wait to hear why you might disagree. But I feel like grapplers are slower to get on the yes, I need to do my S&C train than boxers. Do you agree or disagree?
I'm not sure because I don't have as much experience as Jeff with the boxing community.
Yeah, okay. Jeff,
I'm
what do you
not
think
sure. I
then?
can only talk for the grapplers on that.
I've coached a lot of grapplers, but I don't have a big enough sample size to kind of tell because I gravitate towards striking sports myself. So that's where my community is.
Yeah.
That's where I have the most knowledge.
Right.
So
I think for grapplers, we're just broke as fuck. So it's like, why are we going to spend more money on
Right.
other things,
Yeah,
right?
maybe.
The gym membership costs this. It's a couple of $100 a month, whatever.
And you have to pay to compete.
You have to
Yeah.
you have to pay to compete.
Like boxers and MMA athletes probably make more money on average than grapplers.
Yeah, for
There's
sure.
not a big
Jiu-jitsu is a
appetite for
broke
grapplers.
sport. There's no money in
It's growing
jiu-jitsu.
now, but it's,
Even so, it's comparatively.
And I'm going
like-
to check in for debate. The injury matrix of MMA and like jiu-jitsu or grappling is so much bigger than boxing. So then you've got all these like guys and girls are all broke and broken.
Yeah, I guess the irony is if they invested some of their money into S&C, the injury rate would decrease.
Which was my next question. But I was
But I mean, that's not a household phenomena yet for grapplers, right? It's just starting to leak into the periphery now that you can train more, but some of it is in the weight room and mitigate some of the injuries on the mat. But that's only coming in now, I think.
Right. And how does, I think, intelligent strength and conditioning limit or like reduce your risk of injury?
Well, if the programming is smart and the execution is sound, then in theory, by inoculating the body to certain stresses and certain
Inoculate.
stressors,
Great
just
word.
little mini poisons,
Yeah.
mini stressors to the body, it will respond with a resilient response that then enables you to handle the training of grappling or MMA in its entirety. It's just not as simple as that in reality because you're dealing with combat. You know, the point is to maim and injure
Yeah.
and put somebody's lights out for the most part or
And the
strangle someone.
possibilities in movement are
so injury
vast.
is almost it's an objective of combat sports.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
injury in other sports are like a consequence of
accident or foul
Yeah.
play. Whereas in combat,
Yeah.
it's the aim. So to say that injuries are going to be removed, I think is naive. They're going to come at some point.
Yeah.
It's just in what degree of severity, what grade of tear, and how can you mitigate that smartly in the weight room without increasing the risk of injury? Because we've all seen that happen too, where people push too hard in the
Right.
weight room and now they're more brittle, strangely.
Right.
So yeah, you can reduce the risk if it's done well, but it has to be done well.
Right.
yeah, like intelligent S&C happens in a more controlled environment compared to grappling or boxing, where it's way more variable, way more complex. So when you can control those variables in the weight room, you can focus on specific body parts where you might not be able to during a live roll or during drills.
Right. What do you see as kind of the most common dysfunction or let's say chronic injury that boxers elicit?
Boxers, I would say knees and shoulders.
Right.
Shoulders because they overuse it, and knees because they don't consider legs as an important training factor for boxing. It's like, I have good footwork. Boxing is a primarily punching sport, so I don't really need to train the legs. So because of all of the bouncing and the agility, the knees get really worn down without proper strength training.
Interesting. And
Yeah,
how would you mitigate that if you were to take someone on who had who was coming into boxing or was already like well into it? What kind of things do you add into the programming to?
Could be as simple as full range of motion squats, or it could be a bit more specific, like specific hamstring work or knee over toes,
Right.
knee behind toes,
Right.
maybe.
What do you say to people that are like, "Oh, I can't squat my knees"?
They
Like
can't
they're throwing you the very
Right.
thing that you think you're prescribing them to improve the health
Yeah,
of their
it's
knees. They're
ironic.
like, "Oh,
they
I
can't
can't."
squat because they don't squat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they've
Yeah.
lost that.
Yeah.
So how do you so and this is a question I guess for both of you guys because you've probably been in this scenario a million times where someone's like, well, I can't do that because my knees, I got no knees left or whatever. And how do you get that person squatting again? How do you convince them that it's the right thing for them to do? And how do you approach it?
I mean, you learn this in personal training. It's regressions.
Right.
Making making
Squat
squats
to the
easier
bench
for them.
with
Yeah,
your
squat
body.
to the bench, like
Yeah.
not at maybe just parallel or assisted squats. That's what coaching is all about, like dialing back the training so it's at a level where it challenges them, because everyone's at different levels. You have boxers split squatting like a few 100 pounds, and then you have boxers that can't even bust out like a body weight squat. So
Yeah.
you're working with athletes at different capacities.
Yeah, and you also got to take into account it's like that phrase, I can't squat my knees. We've got to dive a bit deeper than that. That's pretty broad, right? That's pretty general. Like why? What is going on with their hips? What is going on with their ankles? Like I want to know why they say that. And then I'm going to look at them squat too. And if they squat like shit, well, that's a clue, isn't it? So like Geoff says, then you access your library, your database of like, how can I regress the movement to an achievable standard that's challenging?
Right.
And then work them through that continuum instead. Next thing you know, they're squatting.
Yeah.
Might not be squatting in the way they thought squatting to be in the first instance, but they're doing it. They're bending at the knee and they're flexing at the hip kind of thing, right? So if you're smart as a coach, you can, totally agree, regress the movement to a level that's suitable, that's capable for the person in front of you. And it's ironic, right, that when you don't do certain movements, you lose the capability to do certain movements, but that movement might be the thing that actually heals you up.
Right.
It's a vicious cycle. It's like people who say, I have no energy to work out, but they have no energy because they don't work out.
Yeah.
The catch-22 kind of repeats itself, And the coach's job is to shock that loop and change that.
Break the cycle.
Yes. Now, what injuries do you find are sort of the most commonly repeated for grapplers?
Yeah, I've been paying attention to this the last few years. I think the big ones that come up are shoulders, knees, and lower backs. But to be honest, the grappling's about maiming and strangulation anyway. So you could argue any joint, really. Necks as well seems to be common. There's a lot of variables, but a lot of it seems to boil down to some interesting common denominators. And for the knees especially, I'm seeing a lot of it coming from the hip. It's actually further up the chain, whether that's instability or weakness of glutes and hip stabilizers, whatever's going on, mobility sometimes at the hip joint. But often that seems to be transferring down to the knee. With the lower backs, weirdly, a lot of it seems to come from upper back tightness because of our grappling, hunch, Quasimodo, thorax kind of thing. It's amazing how much stress increases on the lower back when you sort of calcify in the upper back regions.
There seems to be a physiological adaptation that is just across the board in combat sport, isn't there? You know?
Because it defends the midline and your vital organs. So there's a point
it's the
to
ready
it.
position.
Yeah.
When you scare someone, they don't go like that. They go like,
yes.
Yeah, for
so
fighting,
that's a very
you're contracted.
physiological.
So
and
there's
neurological
a point
as well.
Neurological,
Yeah, there's a point to that. But it comes at a health cost. I mean, arguably combat comes at a health cost. But in terms of keeping lower back injuries at bay, it's interesting to see the relationship to the upper back tightness. And then interesting that transfers to shoulders too. Very often I see shoulders, stuff I see a lot at the minute is just the upper traps are just like concrete.
The Bane traps.
The lower traps are non-existent, and the upper back is rounded. So the giveaway traps, that seems to contribute a lot to the shoulder issues. So there's lots of injuries in grappling, but very often they boil down to what's going on sort of further up or further down the chain.
What do you say to the trainers and coaches that say like we need to fix that forward hunch?
I think only if it's detrimental to things, and also what's the sacrifice reward relationship for the person in question, right? I know plenty of people that would let their arms snap in competition if there's, $100 on the table, right? That's crazy. To me, that's a bit extreme, but there are people that
health and combat sports don't
really align. So
when you're training a professional grappler and you have a coach say, "Oh, that's not healthy," it's like that's not.
That's not
look
really,
at what we're doing
relative.
here right now.
It's not really
relative.
It's not really part of the conversation. So I think if it's not detrimental, if the posture is not detrimental to their health goals and their career goals, there's not really a problem as far as we can see.
What would you classify as detrimental too? Because you'll hear a lot of combat sport athletes are constantly in pain, but it's manageable, functioning pain. So how do you cross the threshold to detrimental?
Well, ultimately, it's not my choice, is it? It's their choice. It's their career. It's not my choice. So it's their choice.
This?
Yeah, it's up to them. It's up to them, isn't it, really? The definition of detrimental is their definition.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with me, especially if they're employing me.
Yeah.
If I'm employed to get them a gold medal and to contribute to that process, detriment is open-ended definition as far as they see fit. It's not up to me. I can make suggestions and say, hey, man, hip replacement at 40 might not be where we want to go.
Yeah.
But at the same time, some people will take a hip replacement at 40 if it means legacy.
Yeah.
Look at Dan Gable, right? Dan Gable had a hip replacement in, I think, his early 40s. I think on 43, he was on crutches. Don't quote me on that number, but it was young as an athlete goes, right? Legacy, man. It's Dan Gable. So,
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the differences in injuries between like striking sports and grappling sports. you're going to see way more hip replacements and broken limbs. And
Well, it's manipulation of every joint you can get your
Yeah.
hands on, really. Whereas boxing,
Exactly.
you're probably dealing with a lot of, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, overuse injuries,
Yep.
sort of like physiological adaptations to sort of that posture that's needed,
Yeah.
and also head trauma.
yeah,
And then how does S&C really contribute to preventing head trauma?
yeah.
Which is also a question. Yeah, right? Like
Neck,
you can
yeah.
train the neck,
Neck
but
training.
ultimately, even every
You're
time
still
you
getting hit. Yeah,
every
It's
time you
more of
block
like
a punch on your gloves,
it's
you're getting
tactics at
hit.
that point.
tactics and
Yeah.
skills.
Yeah, strategies.
Like you
of-
need to go to a gym that kind of reiterates like hit and don't get hit,
Yes.
Yeah.
which everyone says, but
Which
not everyone follows through.
Has
with that.
evolved though, because old school boxing, like it was like, here, come on over here, take your headgear, like in your
I'll
mouth
take one to
piece
give
off,
one.
and I'm gonna tee one off on
Yeah,
you, and
yeah.
we'll inoculate you to getting punched by giving you brain trauma. Like it has come a long way,
Mhm.
a long way. You're seeing a lot more emphasis being put on the brain health aspect of all sports, actually, but boxing
It's
as well.
so hard in boxing though to hit
it's
and not
the
get hit.
point.
It's
yeah.
so hard. You're
To
in
smash
you're in
someone
a
in the face.
confined space,
Yeah.
and it's measured on damage and points scored on
Yeah.
landing.
and it's
right?
not
It's
as
hard.
entertaining. And combat sports at the end of the day is,
Yeah.
or sports in general, is about entertainment.
Yes.
It's what funds it.
Yes. Well, you get the enthusiasts, right, who watch these fights that are like beautiful chess matches, and we're all like, that was fantastic. And like the common fan is
Golf
like,
club.
that was so fucking boring.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I can't get that time
Where's
back. We're
the
like, what are you
sport?
talking about? That was incredible, right?
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that's what we're going to see with Crawford and Errol Spence. I think it'll be exciting, but I also think it's a boxing fans fight. It's
Yeah.
not a
Slugfest.
It's not going to be that at
Yeah.
all. Yeah, interesting. Wow, cool. Okay, so Geoff, what are your biggest coaching influences? Like, how did you kind of hone the person that you are and how you present that as a professional? Who influenced you along the way?
I've brought a lot of principles from my time with strength athletes. So that kind of set the base for everything. How do I progress from week to week? How do I nail down all the compound lifts? And then I kind of merged that with my experiences being around fighters and training myself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like two worlds colliding, like bridging the gap. We got like the strength training side, and then we got the skills training side where I'm taking exercises like high rep sit-ups, and I'm merging that with more modern strength training exercises like cable wood choppers and med ball slams. So I don't know, it's hard for me to like drop names right now,
Right.
but there are a lot of strength coaches and combat sports coaches which I look up to, and I've kind of taken a bit from everyone and kind of making my own thing,
Yeah.
making my own philosophies.
Yeah. H, same question to you.
Yeah, coaching influences on the S&C side, I guess, names that come to mind. I've got to drop Matt Church in the mix, owner of Locker 27 in the UK.
Shout out to Matt.
Yeah, absolute legend,
Yeah.
and influenced me a large degree with my approach to coaching and how to learn to be a better coach. Will Wayland, sort of a mutual friend
That's one for me as
and
well.
influence for both of us. Yeah, followed Will a long time with his articles around MMA and Jiu-Jitsu S&C. Dan John as well. Dan John's an old boy now, I guess, in the S&C coaching scene, but he actually has influenced me quite a bit just on his simplicity around distilling principles into kind of layman terms. He's one of the few coaches that can actually write and do that. And then Mr. Jovanovic, Mr. Strength Manual.
Aladdin.
Yeah, he's awesome. He was one of the first people I read that actually explained coaching how it actually is, not what it should be and what the
He's
lab
very
definition
underrated.
is. Yeah,
because he's no longer really in the S&C scene, but
Hmm.
he has a book out that's probably like my favorite book.
Yeah, it's so to
terms
the
of
point.
S&C.
Yeah, it's like this is the first guy to actually say, okay, you might think this is what the lab suggests. This is what the textbook says. This is what the data shows. But you go and coach this shit to a group of people. Here's what's going to happen.
Right.
And it's true. Like a lot of his accounts are very accurate. So I really liked his influence on reading his material of just how to the point and kind of the opposite of the dry academia speak that often
Yeah.
creeps into a lot of these texts. It was the opposite. It was very much conversational tone. Yeah, dealing with, I mean, his prima donna accounts of soccer players being princesses, I thought was hilarious.
Is this shocking though, based on the sport?
Not
Is this
at all, but the
shocking?
fact that a coach had the balls to put that in text,
Yes.
rather than being like, yeah, 3
Yeah.
by 12 gets this. He's like,
Yeah.
no, you say 3 by 12 to this princess, and they're going to spit at you. And it's like, no coach had ever spoken like that. I thought that was very refreshing.
It opened my eyes to coaching and like athlete management. Good S&C is more than just exercises. It's risk to benefit ratios or reward to benefits. It's agile planning on the fly.
Yeah, there's so many of those soft skills that don't even get time of day. On the jiu-jitsu front, for me, the two biggest influences, I'd say John Danaher, massive. Love him or hate him, he's by far the most impressive sports performance coach, in my opinion, of all time, with how many people he's taken from arguably non-championship status to championship status. And I'd include George St. Pierre in that list.
Him? Are there haters?
There's a lot. There's a lot of Danaher haters. Probably more in the consumption of his information and the way that he delivers information, because he came from a university professor degree level, PhD level of philosophy at Columbia. From what I understand, that's only really going to appeal to a very small amount of people, let alone
definitely
fighters.
Not the meatheads.
Yeah, if you want to be entertained, you're not listening to John Danaher.
Yeah,
I could listen to him talk all day, though.
So could I.
I listened to his podcast.
So could I. I think he's a fascinating guy, and I genuinely think he's one of the most committed combat sports coaches of all time, and his track record speaks for itself. I don't think there's anyone who has a track record as impressive as him.
Yeah.
And then a chap who's come into my sort of realm more recently, Greg Souders from Standard Jiu-Jitsu. I think he's in Maryland. Takes the ecological approach quite kind of brazenly towards skill development in grappling. But I like the fact he's talking about it, because, we can talk about this another time, but I think the way grappling is taught is broken.
Right.
And he's big on explaining that as to why and how to improve that. So those two guys have been a massive influence for me.
Can you explain what you mean by ecological approach?
Yeah, it's a pretty jargony name for just basically the environment will dictate the response, as opposed to you recalling a technique under pressure. Arguably, recalling a technique under pressure is difficult to do, whereas if you recognize the pattern in front of you, the response will come much faster. And it's much easier for someone to recognize environmental shifts than it is to recall a list of techniques.
The coach doesn't teach the technique, he sets the environment to which the athlete learns.
Yeah, the technique is elicited by a result of the environment. The coach doesn't have to explicitly give instruction. They might just give guidelines. And it's another coaching tool which we use in S&C all the time, but perhaps S&C as a career is not based around that. But there's argument to be said that coaching grappling could be based around that. And that's what Mr. Souders is trying to kind of represent, is that he doesn't explicitly explain technique at all. And in his whole training program is based around environmental factors, which is fascinating to me.
Coaches who work with youth and like young kids almost know this better than a lot of
100%.
expert
Yeah, they almost
coaches.
have to.
Yeah, they have to.
Kids do not
You can't tell
understand
them,
technique.
hey kid, like do 50 reps of this, 50 reps of that. No, like they know how to create games to which the kids can explore their own movements, their own decisions.
And they funnel themselves into a desired outcome.
Exactly.
Really.
It's funneling.
You're
funneling the answer.
the athletes into whichever direction that you want them to.
Yeah.
Instead of hand feeding them, hey, do reps of this, reps of that.
Yeah, it's true. Anyone that's worked with kids will know. I remember I taught a wrestling workshop once to a load of rugby boys, and they were like 7 to 10 years old, I think. It was a favor for a friend. Yeah. And I learned very quickly.
Hardest population to work with.
Oh, man.
Shout
I
out
had
to
my little piece of paper with all my things on within the first 3 seconds.
You're like throwing it in the garbage.
Oh, it was screwed up in my pocket. I was like, you can forget that.
Yeah.
I was like, it's game time, boys. Let's go. And had to shift my entire approach.
Right. So give us why don't you guys both each dip into grappling and then dip into boxing, and kind of give us an example of a scenario that like you would use to funnel someone into a desired outcome by using a game or a scenario.
I can go for grappling if you want and start things off. So I guess like a simple one in jiu-jitsu terms would be, in order to control somebody, right? Control someone on the floor, there needs to be a connection. And that connection needs to be a lot of surface area. So either your chest to their chest is a common one, or what you kind of think of as pinning, or your chest to their back, which we kind of understand as like the back control or the back mount, as it were. How can you find your way there? Because if you can get there and you can be on the offensive portion of that, you can dominate the pin. So you can, in jiu-jitsu especially, we do a position. There's so many positions. So you would zoom into a position, and then you'd give guidelines for the game, for the drill, for the exploration. Try and find your way in this position to a chest-to-chest scenario. And that's it. That's like the only guideline you'll give.
That's the objective.
Once you get the chest-to-chest
How do you
connection, keep it for the rest of this round,
Right.
for example.
Right. And how does that translate to boxing?
Same in boxing, you set the rules of the game or the objectives instead of using clear instructions, right?
Yes.
So at Quinnett Boxing, shout out to John.
Shout out John Quinnett.
What's up, John?
What we'll do is we'll do tech sparring, and one partner will have their lead hand only. Might be a straight lead straight. Other partner gets a rear hook. And then just with those dynamics alone, you get a lot of movement options that the athletes get to explore, whether it's circling to one specific side or limiting shot selections. Just setting the rules
Strip
and
it down.
Yeah,
I
strip
think
it
that
down.
is so important, especially in a combat sport that involves, head trauma. That sparring is contextual. As the majority of the
situational
time,
sparring.
situational. When I first started, it was like, all right, we're fucking sparring, gloves on. Right? It was like the coach's energy set the stage. Like we're fight. Oh fuck,
It's
we're
a fight
fighting.
with headgear.
Yeah,
It's
100%.
not really drilling.
And it was so unsafe. And I've seen, and then you don't have enough people. So like, oh, bring this one in. And there's like a 50-pound weight difference and someone gets a concussion and they never box again. I've seen shit like that. And now we're starting to see boxing, I think people taking the training a little bit more seriously. And then you got guys like, Vasily Lomachenko, who rarely spars, not rarely spars, but obviously his sparring, I think probably the majority of his sparring is very contextual, situational. There's an objective. It's not just a free-for-all slugfest. And I think that's so important, especially for boxing, because it's one wrong puncher, two guys, two girls, whatever, throw their right hands at the same time and step in. And next thing you know, you're seeing stars and, you're potentially in a bad position. And I think that that's crucial for the longevity of an athlete in boxing.
Yeah, at Quinnett Boxing, we've had to deal with a few concussions over the last year,
and
so
it's
we've been
gonna
learning
happen.
learning how to deal with it.
Mitigate
and
that.
It's really humbling for sure.
Yeah.
Because it's gonna put athletes out for months,
Yes.
and they want to fight, they want to train, but it's better for them to kind of rest up,
Yeah.
especially as coaches who care
Yeah.
about our athletes.
And I think it's really it's better for boxers to explore the ability to utilize new technique or to try something different if the environment is stripped down, right? There's less variables. There's less risk of injury. They can experience something without necessarily the repercussions of like a fight. And I think that's crucial for boxing. Quinnett, how did you get linked up with that crew? Because you are the coach to we were talking about this in the pre-show, 4 fighters that are going to be on our
4
card.
fighters on the card, yeah.
Because we got River, we got Kadir, we got Logan.
We got Rhett
and
as well.
H has also worked with Logan, so that's kind of fun. And then we got Rhett. So how did you link up with those guys?
There was a coach at Quinnett. Shout out to Adrian. He was a fighter and a coach there. And when I was living in Thailand, I worked with him remotely with the program during COVID. And we did 1 or 2 months together, unfortunately, and he got COVID. Actually, he got really sick, so he had to take a lot of time off. But after that, he gave me a shout to John and Rebecca.
Sick.
And said, hey, this is a good coach. Maybe he'll fit in our team. So when I moved back to Vancouver, we had a chat and just went from there. We clicked instantly. They were willing to bring me on. So it shows a lot of humility because I don't think a lot of gyms in the Lower Mainland has invested.
Not enough.
Not only in an S&C coach, but a sports nutritionist. We have a seasonal psychologist that comes and does seminars for us.
John is so invested in the incomplete package of how his athletes perform. And I think that should be the standard.
Yeah. And it's special for me because I'm not only handling the S&C, but they're giving me a say in how we develop the high performance team and how the athletes develop. So I didn't realize that was what I wanted to do as well, but that gave me a lot of freedom to work with athletes outside of the S&C.
Yeah. And I think that would be probably a place that you would like to see grappling gyms approach their competitors as well.
Yeah, I guess if it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because at the amateur level in jiu-jitsu, there's no money in competition at all. So like you said earlier, you pay to compete. So yeah, it would be cool just, I guess, for the sake of strength and conditioning and grappling and the benefits it can provide to both parties to see it go that way. Yeah, for sure.
And like arguably, if there's no development of amateurs, there's no one turns pro and no one ends up doing this, and then there's never any pros. So you almost have to start at that amateur level and kind of like foster that performance.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, and we're seeing it with like the Cole Abates and the up and comers in jiu-jitsu that they're starting at like 4 or 5 years old. Mm-hmm. So it's coming. It's coming. Jiu-jitsu is definitely turning a corner in kind of its exposure and its popularity and its approach to taking S&C seriously. It was always kind of the grappling joke that the lifting equipment in the gym was just dust gathering and a place to hang the gis. And if I've been to plenty of gyms where the racks have been dusty and wipe the tear from my eye. But I think that will change soon, especially as now you're seeing with the rise of ADCC and Worlds being big on YouTube, even for non-grapplers clicking in, non-grapplers buying tickets to the shows. It's gonna have to take S&C more seriously because the athletic performance level is going to improve and increase. So that can only be backed by a sound foundation in sports performance, really. Yeah.
Well, I think just the rums are, empty now. So I think now's a great time to dive into the landmine press. And with
I don't need a drink for that.
with the rise of jiu-jitsu as well, and like the attention on ADCC and all these people, I think more Gen Pop is getting excited about the sport of jiu-jitsu. A lot of people are trying it. Everyone and their fucking mom and girlfriend are trying jiu-jitsu nowadays, which is cool. All eyes turn to Instagram for everything they want to know and learn. And boxing's been there for a minute. People coming in looking for, sport specific conditioning and sport specific movements. And I think now it's happening in grappling as well. Do you troll? Do you laugh and enjoy yourself while you do it? And what drives you fucking nuts about Instagram and like the prescription of S&C for jiu-jitsu? Come on, boys, let's go.
Harry and I troll all the time. Maybe
do you guys have like a private chat?
More than me. Maybe.
I'm like a
he goes after guys on
I'm
Instagram.
going to just pretend like I don't know what H does.
Yeah. I'm more passive aggressive about it now. I'll make memes about things I don't like. Harry will repost, this guy is shit.
Yeah. I'm more like, I do it less, but I'm more blunt. Jeff will actually turn it into a meme, which arguably travels much further anyway on Instagram, which is kind of funny.
I've went after guys directly, but it's just not worth it.
Do they block you in the end, or what's the deal?
No.
Really?
Because I don't tag them. I'm not brave enough to tag them.
Not brave enough because they're a little more passive aggressive. Okay, because I want to spend some time and just chat shit about this for a second. But let's start with the landmine punch because we've been alluding to coming back to this, and here we are. If you've been watching this podcast for the last hour, waiting for this moment, here you are.
The landmine
punch. Talk to us about the landmine punch.
I don't hate the exercise. I hate what the exercise represents.
Okay.
The exercise represents an influx of S&C coaches wanting to work with fighters. And the best way to do that is put your foot in the door. Hey, this exercise looks like a punch. So that kind of shows I know boxing and striking and combat sports, right?
Right.
So they'll kind of over prescribe that. They'll put too many marbles in that basket.
Right.
Whereas boxing is much more complex than a landmine punch.
Sure.
And you're going to get way more training benefits out of simple movements.
And is a landmine punch even effective as a punch development tool? It's not even in the same plane as a punch.
Yeah, it's not in the same plane. I don't think any one exercise is effective. It's the integration of all the exercises together.
Right.
I think landmine punches are okay, just like squats are okay for boxing, right? Mm-hmm. You're not going to become a better boxer just by squatting. Right. Directly, at least. Yeah. And you're not going to become a better boxer doing landmine punches, but I'd have to look at the whole program and see what this coach does for me to make a judgment about it. Right. So speaking of judgment, what passive aggressive Jeff? Yeah. What is your least favorite Instagram flash boxing sport specific exercise that you see thrown around there? Jason's loving this part. Punching with heavy dumbbells. Oh, yeah, like a 5-pounder. And they can get about 8 inches. I like 1 and 2 pounders. Right. Because you have all these scientists saying, it's not even in the same plane. But any boxer will know it's sometimes about feel.
Right.
Your shoulders feel good with 1 or 2 pound dumbbells, and that's part of the sport.
Well, and it's very
That's
similar
not part
to
of
a glove.
SNC, but that's part
Yeah.
of boxing.
Yeah.
And SNC coaches don't respect that because 1, they don't know the culture, or 2, they don't train.
Yeah.
So you got to merge the 2, and that's where I think bridging the gap concept comes from.
Right. Right.
Landmine punches, obviously. Anything like Joel Seedman does, you know.
Give us.
Any
Tell.
gimmicky shit.
Yeah.
Like,
You just named someone, by the way, too. Should we tag
Yeah,
him on
d-
this
tag
as
him,
well
tag
and
him.
post a reel?
Tag
Would
him.
you repost it?
yeah, I'll
You
repost it.
Okay.
He doesn't need any more exposure. He's done enough.
All I do is stir the pot. Okay, so Joel Seedman, what's he doing that's stupid?
I think there's a video of one of his athletes like holding a trap bar, and he's just like smacking his head with a
Sick.
exercise ball.
Love it.
And it's like, it's neck training. Is he? No.
Because we have these Russian coaches on the beach with their guys like with their hands behind their head, and they're just getting.
It's funny because when Russian coaches do something silly,
Yeah.
it's like cooler, you know? It's like, oh, it's Soviet.
Yeah.
But when we do it, like when North Americans
Because
do
they're
it, it's
actually gnarly as
Yeah.
fuck. Those are some tough psychos.
and you know, like they've developed their athletes over time, and
Yeah.
you know the Soviet development system, so
Right.
you're more willing to give it some room, give it the benefit of the
Yeah.
doubt.
Fair. And they've got some secret juice that they might use behind the scenes too.
Yeah.
Age, what are your like least favorite things that you see that you love to hate on?
Yeah, well, I guess a big one for me is it looks like the sport, so let's load it, and therefore it will improve. So whether it's, what I posted the other day, the rubber bands around your ankles,
Yeah.
doing like kick throughs and grappling with a dummy does nothing. On that logic, we should load forward rolls with a weighted vest,
Right.
you know, and that will get us better at grappling. It just doesn't work. Or, you know, play guard on your back with a barbell on your bare feet. Like it doesn't, it looks like the sport, but it's not the sport. And that's one of the biggest fallacies. Now there's an infinite number of variations on that statement that you'll see on Instagram because it gets views and it gets clicks, it gets likes. But it annoys me. And it annoys me when a coach will just post that for traction or to sell a product or a service when that's not helping white belts. Let's
Right.
see that. That's not really helping them. Another one is people that are, I guess, more in like the personal training space and are not taking the initiative to go into the S&C space with reading and looking at studies and, you know, furthering their education, but then posting strength and conditioning advice for grapplers or just combat sports athletes in general. The guy I hate on all the time does it all the time. And I'm just like, this guy's, well, I don't want him to get more publicity, you see.
Right, fair.
That's why I never
Lead
tag these
something.
guys. Yeah, I screenshot them because I don't want them getting more money for what they're doing. You know,
Right.
if you've already got 20,000 followers and you're converting a 2% follow rate into money, that's money. That's you do the math on that. That's money. This guy's making money off selling memberships and programs
He
that
must
are.
have heard Arnie say everything is selling.
Yeah, and he, you know, arguably he's a good marketer. These guys are good marketers, but unfortunately, marketing doesn't create improved sports performance. Really, you know, science has got a better track record. So, yeah, I guess the people that are marketers posing as coaches, and then the people that load sporting movements and just assume that that's going to transfer. They're probably two of my biggest ones.
It's SNC coaches trying to insert themselves into the combat sports space without actually going into it.
Without doing the trench work or without doing some of the training themselves.
Yeah.
I know I often post this debate up just for, you know, interesting sort of feedback from people. Do you need to do the sport in order to be an S&C coach for it? And I
literally my
think,
next
I
question.
guess ultimately, no, you don't, because, you know, there's a lot of sports and S&C coaches can contribute to probably more sports than they can be an expert or a champion in. However, I think in combat sport, let's take the punching with dumbbells example, like Geoff just mentioned. If you're not part of boxing, you won't understand the culture and the heritage that has. And like Geoff said, it's about feel. You won't have that. And
Not
then
everything makes sense on the
physical
surface,
level.
yeah,
or sort of to
it can't
to-
be explained by
yeah,
science.
by
or-
a study. There's no studies on punching with dumbbells. So what are you going to do? You know, it's a cultural thing. But the fighter's reporting positively about that, right? They're getting a positive benefit for that. So you've got to take that into account. If you boxed, though, much easier process, right? So I actually think for combat sports, there's a lot more mileage for the coach on the S&C side to have some involvement. And it makes your life so much easier when it comes to load management on behalf of the athlete.
Right.
You know, if an athlete's just told you, yeah, man, I had like a 9 out of 10 sparring session last night. And if you've done a 9 out of 10 sparring session, you can relate.
Yeah.
You know what that means.
Yeah.
Rather than
buy-in
just,
too with your athletes.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. A lot of the guys I work with trust me because I grapple.
Yeah.
Right? They don't trust me necessarily education I've done or how many followers I've got, you know, how many gold medals I haven't produced. They trust me because I grapple and I can relate to their concerns and their questions. And I think in combat sports, it actually goes further for the S&C coach to take part.
I agree
Wow.
with everything.
Yeah. It rings super true. I think that there is a level of buy-in, and you know that goes back to even just the athlete having the buy-in enough to communicate with you effectively, so you can help coach them through it. If they know that you know, I think they're probably more likely to be honest and to, you know, log their stuff and tell you how their sparring was and stuff as well. If you understand their language, if you can speak their language on some level. But I agree. I don't think all coaches are great athletes. I don't think all the great athletes are capable of being great coaches. And arguably being an athlete at the highest level takes so much of you mentally, physically, your time. You can't be the best, like a high level coach and a high level competitive athlete at the same time.
Yeah, different ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, for
to be
sure.
an athlete, you have to be really selfish, and as a coach, you got to be selfless.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, you don't have to train to be a decent strength coach, but I feel like all the coaches, S&C coaches I look up to in the combat sports space, like they all train. It's more of a question of why wouldn't you train? If you love that sport so much and you're working with athletes in that sport, why wouldn't you train?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah, that's
out
a
of,
great
like-
way of putting
Yeah,
it.
we're not trying to get our foot in the door with combat sports athletes to make money. There's no money.
Oh, I'm in.
Hang on.
There's no money.
Cut me in then, bro. There's no money.
I think it's a long grind. I think it's a long grind to get to that place.
Yeah, I don't even think it's here yet. It's not like S&C for soccer or pro rugby. You do a 3-year internship, you can get on the 10-year ladder to on a 6-figure salary if you work in pro soccer or pro rugby. You can't do that in MMA.
It's like we joked about in the beginning of the podcast. It's like a lot of S&C coaches for fighters, they all say, yeah, fighters don't have any money. I make money through Gen Pop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how it works.
Some of the top coaches that kind of influence us, we've heard it from them too.
Yeah,
For sure.
they got it. They you know, they'll
Like, we know guys that train like UFC fighters, but they're like, I make my money off of the gym, training Gen Pop.
A UFC athlete doesn't come to you and go, hey man, so I'm getting paid $5,000 to show,
gonna pay you a
$5,000 to win,
percentage.
and I'm going to pay you 33% of that $10,000 if I win.
33%.
Never said by any UFC athlete in history.
Yeah.
What happens is when you make the top 5 and you're $120,000 to show and $120,000 to win, you chat with your team about cutting people in because you can afford it. But until then,
And you've been with them for quite
a
a few
decade.
years. You've developed them, right?
Yeah.
There's a big difference with like working with an athlete than developing them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People cut in at the pro level and they'll be like, look who's on my client roster. It's like, no, you jumped on the bandwagon because they're top 10. You didn't get them to the top 10. Massive difference, right? And even so, how many people out of your population that you do train, your client base, have got the potential to make it top 5 to earn $240,000 to cut you in? Probably less than 1%.
So small.
Yeah,
So to bank on the fact that you're going to make money out of these guys is stupid and naive. It's not how you earn your money. So we don't get into it for that. So coming full circle, if you're grinding this much in a game that doesn't really pay that much, you might as well enjoy the time on the mat or in the ring or hitting the bag, right? You might as well enjoy it because you're not there for the bucks, right?
Yeah, sounds like show.
You have to enjoy something about it, whether it's watching it or being involved in the culture. But the best way to do that is to train.
Yeah.
To train, I'm always skeptical of people pumping out programs for said combat sport. I've never dipped into it or tried like one class.
Yeah.
Or like, one of my clients showed me like a couple of things one time. That's not training in the sport.
Yeah.
I think
I watch UFC, bro.
Yeah, I'm a Saturday night pay-per-viewer.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're an authority. No, I think actually, putting in 5+ years into the sports that you're coaching these guys on just goes such a long way.
Yeah.
But because athletes don't have, or fighters that don't have that much money, there's a big misconception that like, I'm not going to invest in a sports nutritionist, an S&C coach, a physiotherapist until I get into the top 5 or top 10.
you might
but
not
like
make
you're
it
not
there.
gonna make it if you don't start earlier.
Yeah, such a good point. You might not make it if you're the first guy injured or you don't make weight a couple times.
Yeah.
Which
absolutely.
for fighters, if you're listening, is why you have to be smart about approaching a sponsorship deal.
Yeah.
If you don't have the money to pay for these things, but you're getting exposure, you can leverage that exposure. You know, you can talk about that, you can communicate that. Good coaches will be open to sponsorship and entertaining what that means for both of you. Just because you don't have the money doesn't mean you have to wait, like Geoff says, till top 5.
Absolutely.
Till you start thinking about these things. You've got to think about them, you know, before you go pro, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And if you can't afford that, how can you leverage that in other ways? There's many ways to barter and exchange of services and skills. It doesn't just have to be
Or
financial.
even investing your time doing a little bit of research, finding the good programs, differentiating between like the good advice and the bad.
It's difficult. It's difficult. Like we run into it all the time with just getting fighters to do anything outside of their camp at all. Get their medicals done. There's no fight if you don't get your medical done. But it's like that extra little bit of effort outside of their camp, or thinking, you know what, I'm going to market myself effectively so that I get these opportunities thrown at me so that I can improve or make more money or sell more tickets with my code so I can pump my purse up. They're not thinking outside of
Like
their
a professional athlete. They're
Yes.
thinking like a fighter.
They're thinking,
well, gotta be both.
Exactly. And they're thinking like a young fighter that I don't have, I don't count. You know, it's like, okay, what if you want to have a career in this? It's not going to be handed to you. You have to be very, very hungry and market yourself. And arguably, we have free tools right now at our fingertips that are extremely powerful marketing tools, especially if you're doing shit like hanging out in the gym and hitting pads and looking dope all day. Take some videos, tag some people. It's not that challenging, but you know, to echo what you guys are saying, I mean, we see that on the promotion side as well. We're like, yo, if you just like put 2% of your energy into marketing yourself, this stuff will grow exponentially in your benefit in the future. And
the days of like being just a fighter and just training, it's over.
It's over. We're
You
past
gotta be
that
an
digitally.
athlete. You
We're
gotta
past
stay
that.
accountable to your coaches, to your interdisciplinary team.
And we've all
to
seen
everyone.
all the fighters that have done a really good job of shortcutting it, right?
Yeah.
McGregor's the obvious one.
Yeah.
Right? Skill set wise,
What do you mean shortcutting it?
he shortcutted the process by using marketing.
Right.
McGregor rose to the top far faster than anyone because of his post-fight interviews, in my opinion.
And he trained super hard as well.
He backed it up. He won. You know, he won in impressive fashion.
He understood the relevance of the marketing component
It was
into where
huge.
he
And
wanted to go.
you can watch his career purely in post-fight interviews and see how he's changed his marketing approach.
Yeah.
He started with using Ireland as the backing call, which was very clever. If you use a national support factor, you can go further. So he used Ireland to get far. Once he got far, he started then converting into his own business interests and promoting himself because he had the self-leverage to do that.
Yeah.
But he played the game perfectly, in my opinion, in rising to the ranks faster, getting the title shots quicker, landing bigger sponsorship deals faster, and more impressively, simply by marketing himself in a more intelligent fashion. Now, you could argue that's a personality thing, but you know, there's such a thing as media training.
Absolutely.
You can learn how to come across better on camera. You know, how many foreign fighters do you see that just refuse to learn English?
Yeah, I was about to
Your
say.
paycheck's cut, man.
Exactly.
Your paycheck's cut. It's biased and it's prejudiced and it sucks. But hey, look at all the ones that do learn English, how much more money they make.
Yeah.
It's no coincidence, right?
Yeah. Well, and saying like, oh, you know, I'm just a fighter. Like, I'm not focused on, you know, selling tickets and this shit. It's like, well, you're probably not going to look Eddie Hearn in the eyes and be like, yeah, man, I'm not really going to sell some tickets. Like, you're not on the show. You're not on the show. So ultimately, if you want to have a career, you either have to be so outstandingly impressive at just your skill set, or you have to develop skill sets outside of boxing or grappling or MMA.
And one of them's way easier than the other.
Yeah.
Way easier.
I feel like fighters feel like doing all that other stuff like marketing kind of diminishes them
They feel
as
like
a fighter.
it's a
but
sellout.
like,
It's not.
yeah,
It's
you can
for
train
you.
hard and
Yeah.
market yourself.
Yeah. You just got to find the way to do it that feels integral.
Yes. It's
Which-
about applying your
yeah.
voice to it and
Yeah.
making it your own.
Which-
Absolutely.
It's a
Same
bit
goes
of
with
trial and error.
coaches. Like some coaches are
Yes.
happy I'm just training athletes. I'm not going to post anything. And they almost feel like an imposter trying to market themselves. Like,
Yeah.
I certainly felt that way in the
Well, we've
beginning
all
of my
seen
career.
cringy marketing too that kind
Yeah.
of makes your skin crawl and you're like, oh, I don't want to be like that. But you don't have to be like that.
Yeah.
And you can still do it.
Yeah, and in coaching is fascinating, well, because our predecessors, you know, thinking strength and conditioning is a very new industry on
Yeah.
paper. It's only, you know, about 30 odd years old, if that. our predecessors didn't have to market themselves in the same digital fashion because the technology was different when they were coming up. Most of our predecessors are also based in professional team sports or professional sports, i.e. the pre-combat sport era, right? Like combat sports S&C is very, very new because UFC was only coming around since the early 90s. So it's even newer. But our generation and below need to learn the marketing aspect of what we do if you want to not be lost in the noise. It's just the lay of the land now. You can sit around and sulk about that and miss jobs. Or you can, like you say, invest a couple of % of your energy into that and start landing jobs. So, you know, it's up to you really, but to ignore it, it's stupid because the world is moving at a different pace now to the mid 90s. So you've got to try and stick out in a pretty noisy realm, right? Especially as a coach.
Absolutely. Geoff, what's next for you heading into kind of the remainder of 2023?
Focus on the boxing team, focus on my athletes around the world, a lot of remote coaching. Might do some more traveling by the end of the year. Yeah. But
and Jeff's jet lagged right now. He's putting in an incredible effort. Yeah. All the way from, you were in like Turkey? I
went to London, I went to Turkey, I went to Kazakhstan.
Wow.
So it was
mega trip.
Wow.
Mega trip for me.
Amazing.
I got back, started working right off the plane. Yeah. 18-hour flight.
You're a difficult man to lock down, Geoff.
Yeah. He's a busy boy.
Yeah.
Busy boy.
Great. So just focusing on your athletes, your remote
focusing
coaching.
on my athletes, yeah.
Awesome.
Training harder, training more.
Yeah.
Get a fight in, son.
Get a fight in.
Yeah, towards the end of the year, why not?
You want to make a pro debut in boxing?
Yeah.
No, Geoff,
I don't have an amateur record for boxing.
Hey, you know what?
Boxing's
market your way
I'm
to
gonna
the
look
top.
the other way.
Yeah.
Just have a really great post-fight interview. Land my punches all over your Instagram, no problem. Yeah. Harry, what's next for you as you kind of enter into the halfway point in 2023?
So yeah, the online no more skinny grappler world is growing for me fast, which is great.
Yeah. Can you do it once for the show?
Oh yeah, skinny grappler. The catchphrase is working. Yeah, it's going really well with my online group of folks, which is really fun. Some exciting projects for me professionally that still can't quite speak about publicly yet, but some cool stuff behind the scenes, working with some other high-level S&C coaches in the combat sports space. ADCC is coming up August 19th, so lots of our guys are getting ready for that. I'm getting ready for that myself. Our club is too. How do you
balance the coaching and the competing together?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult. I have to portion off my time for coaching. I have to portion off my time for self-organization and planning my own stuff and what I need. Yeah, it's difficult, but it's a challenge I really enjoy.
How about from like a mindset standpoint? Like I understand like scheduling off, okay, here's 2 to 3 hours for me to train, but do you have to make that switch from your training regimen to coaching someone else?
Yes,
are you still thinking about your own training while you're coaching?
No,
are you thinking about coaching
it's
when you're
immersive for me on both parts. Yeah. So if I'm working with people, it's just all about them and it's immersion into that. Usually when I'm doing that style of coaching, I'm on the sidelines and it's all eyes and voice and pointing and whatever else other tools I use from a coaching perspective. When it's me and I'm immersed in it, then it's no coaching. It's literally black and white like that. It's the only way I can work it. I find it really difficult to step in and out of both roles within one time frame. It's one or the other.
Do you have the urge to coach during like live roles or sparring or?
Sometimes.
Because you got to be selfish. Like
sometimes
especially if you like roll with your students or something.
Yeah, sometimes. If it's a mistake that's letting us both down.
Yeah.
So if my development is being impeded by that mistake and their development too, I'll mention it. But if it's just something that their development's being impeded, I'll just have to be selfish and be like, well, my time right now is not dedicated to fixing that. I'm going to exploit that and use that to my advantage in the exchange. So yeah, I find blending really difficult. It's one or the other for me. And being on the sidelines makes the coaching much easier, i.e. not in grappling practice. And then when I'm in grappling practice and getting sweaty and all the rest of it, it's total immersion for me. But I enjoy that. I enjoy the challenge. Everything always comes full circle into being a better coach for me. All my competition experiences, all my mistakes, all the things I learned the hard way on the mat, I think contribute to being a better coach in grappling and also in S&C too.
Talking about full circle, my first ever podcast was on Harry's podcast.
No
during
way.
COVID 2020.
Wow.
Yeah, he was the first person to have me on.
That was a great first effort, I must say.
Fantastic.
Great first effort.
Maybe on your end.
Yeah, that's cool,
I was
isn't it?
nervous
Fast
as
forward
fuck.
Yeah.
3 years later.
Oh my God, I love that.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So it's only been 3 years? Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
3
3
long
long
years.
fucking years. COVID
Yeah.
was so
Long
long.
years.
One of
Tough
them felt
years.
like 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Guys, I could talk to you guys all night. This has been fantastic. Jeff, I appreciate you and your busy travel schedule.
Thanks for
making this
having-
time for us as well.
Not that
Age and your
busy.
busy schedule, making the time to come
Pleasure,
on
absolute
the podcast.
pleasure.
We've got lots of, athletes, boxing fans, coaches, cutmen, commission. Y'all watching this episode, if you have questions for these guys, if you want to learn more about how to work with either of these guys, we'll drop their Instagram handles, right? Probably the best way to reach out to y'all.
Yep.
Give them a follow. They have some really interesting content. They're always showing and demonstrating themselves in the practice, as well as how you guys work with your athletes. And I think having more people who really know what the fuck they're talking about in their respective sports is really important for the integrity of strength and conditioning, as well as performance in combat sport that we know and love. So I appreciate you guys so much for coming on the show, chatting shit about, combat sports and your experiences through it, and all the training and all the hard work that you guys put into what you do.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of the Empire Boxing Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Jay. Subscribe for more. And thank you to Dead Man's Fingers for the delicious rum that we easily cleaned up. So if you want to hit them up and learn more about how to get your hands on a bottle of your own, follow us and use our code Empire10.
Make sure to listen, follow, and subscribe to Empire Boxing on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube.